Last month I was in Tulum, Mexico, and there I saw the most dramatic wealth gap I've ever experienced. On one side of the road there was a shantytown, with houses built out of nothing but scraps of metal and wood, while on the other side of the road they were building luxury resorts and hotels. This got me thinking what creates wealth gaps, how they impact the world, and of course, if they're fixable. To start off, I want to quickly define wealth gaps. A wealth gap refers to the distribution of assets within a society, particularly between different groups of individuals. These things exist everywhere, some on smaller scales like in Tulum, others in entire countries. Focusing in on the US, the top 10% of families hold 72% of the total wealth, with families in the top 1% holding more than 1/3 of that. That's fairly significant. And that's just the wealth gap within the US. Worldwide in 2023, the average GDP per capita income was around $22,000. To put that in perspective, in America the poverty level is a yearly income of $35,000. That's a 45% difference just between the poverty in America and the average income worldwide. It's this global wealth gap, as well as inner city gaps, that are creating some major problems, both for communities and economies. The last thing I want to highlight before we start is the difference between income and wealth, because it's here where it becomes much harder to measure this gap. For example, someone may have an income of $50,000 a year and have 0 student loans and own their house outright. This person would be considered far wealthier than someone who makes $70,000 a year but has $100,000 in student loans and pays $1,500 a month for rent. So it's hard to measure someone's wealth without knowing their full circumstance, and it's this that helps lead us into what creates wealth gaps. Arguably, these gaps aren't caused by one or even a few things, but more of a byproduct of many systemic issues from the past and present. As an example, I want to highlight the racial wealth gap in the US. In 2022, the median white household held $285,000 in wealth. That's more than 6 times the median black household at $44,000 and 4 times more than a Hispanic household at $62,000. Most would be quick to assume that this arose early on in America's growth, way back when African Americans were slaves, or perhaps when they were heavily discriminated against. And while you would be correct, the restrictions to education during these times and unequal wages continue to affect newer generations, as they don't get the benefits of generational wealth. However, in modern day, these gaps still continue to grow, so it couldn't just be that. This is from a whole host of new systemic problems, one of the biggest being home ownership. For starters, residential segregation artificially lowers demand, placing a forced ceiling on home equity for African Americans who own homes in non-white neighborhoods. For most who bought their homes in the 80s and 90s, they have watched their house values double or even triple. Yet in primary black neighborhoods, the prices have largely only risen with inflation, so they're not getting that additional wealth boost most get. This is also where the past is really having some consequences on newer generations. As a result of historical wealth accumulation, white families can assist in buying homes and start acquiring equity an average of 8 years earlier than black families. This also means they have lower interest rates and lending costs, which means less debt and cheaper houses. You can really see how this compounds. Every generation will continue getting further and further behind due to past events they couldn't control and systemic issues we haven't solved today. Unfortunately, racial wealth gaps are just scratching the surface. Global wealth inequality is where we start seeing the true implications. The wealth gap between countries can be primarily attributed to colonialism and the Industrial Revolution way back in the 14th to 19th centuries. However, in modern day it has only grown, with recent uneven economic growth as countries' economies rapidly develop without proper regulation and order. All this wealth inequality has had some major impacts on our economies and the global economy as a whole. It's estimated that raising inequality has slowed growth in the US by 2 to 4 percentage points of our GDP annually. That's between $500 billion and $1.2 trillion lost. This is because the top 10%, which holds 72% of America's wealth, are saving their money, meaning it's not circulating through the economy like it's supposed to. When lower income groups have less disposable income, they spend less, which leads to weaker demand for goods and services. Also, by saving their money, less is being invested into new ideas, leading to a slowdown in innovation. Now, that's a lot of issues, so are wealth gaps fixable? Honestly, I underestimated this question and how hard it would be to fix. You can't just ask the wealthy to redistribute their wealth. When people have power, they tend to not give it up. We do know that the bottom 90% of wages has slowed in recent years as income is increasingly concentrated at the top. We would also need to fix a lot of our systemic issues like education access, inequality based on race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, nationality, economic status, language, physical appearance, marital status, pretty much all of it. Additionally, we need to prioritize investments in developing countries. Not the kind of investments that funnel profits to foreign entities, but those that directly create opportunity and improve the lives of people within these countries. By addressing these issues collectively, we can work towards reducing wealth hoarding at the top. This seems like an impossible task, but it is being done. Norway, which has the smallest wealth gap, achieved this by having strong social welfare systems, meaning universal healthcare, free education, and generous unemployment benefits. They also have a high union membership. Around 70% of the workforce is covered by collective agreements. This ensures fair wages and job security. Of course, there's no such thing as free lunch, and to pay for this, they have high taxes, not only for the wealthy, but on the general population. So I guess the real question would be if taxes are worth the trade-off, but that would be a question for another day. This was a really complicated topic, and there was a lot to unpack. If you have anything you want to add to this discussion, please join the Discord in the description or just leave a comment. But for now, that's it for me, so I'll see you guys again next week.